It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show, only on Secular Media Network.
Well, hello there. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. This is show number 162. In this episode, we are going to talk about index funds, what they are, why you should use them. I had several listeners lately, including one this last week, that said, Phil, can you go over index funds? You keep mentioning them on the show. Why should I use them? And I thought, well, I've gone over this, but it's been a while, and the show has grown a whole lot. Matter of fact, last week, the Dave Ramsey special is the most downloaded show ever. I know compared to other shows, I'm still very, very small potatoes, but it's at 3,000 downloads. So thank you to all the listeners, and of course, a special welcome to anybody and everybody that's coming over after hearing my segment on the Thinking Atheist podcast. It is my pleasure to have you here. Go check out several different episodes. And, of course, if you like the show, 5-star rating on iTunes would be really nice. Gotten several of those. And, of course, you could share with your friends or on your Facebook wall anything that helps me and helps you and maybe helps some of your friends learn how to money. So the basic gist of the show is generally it's about 1/3 finance and 2/3 atheism. And, of course, like I mentioned last week, was the Dave Ramsey special. So, again, we're going to move on, and today we will talk about, like I said, index funds, and I'm also going to talk about the value of buying a used car versus a new car. It is one of the basic fundamentals of my advice is that when people say they're going to buy a new car, I say, you're really going to get a new car? And they go, well, a newer car, a new car to me, a replacement car. So I suggest that people say, I'm going to get a replacement car. Stop even using the word new because it's far more fiscally responsible, at least so I thought. Wink, wink. We're going to talk about that. To buy a used car, and I want people to get in the habit of saying replacement car, not saying new car, because in the long run that saves you a lot of money. However, I just broke one of my own rules, so I thought maybe this should be a show segment. It's one of those things that as a good skeptic, I am open to making changes in my philosophies and my worldview if the evidence supports it. And we were planning a vacation, which we took, which is why I missed a whole week for you listeners, and my apologies. I look at these other people that do shows every week without fail. It's freaking work. I mean, my show is not that complicated. It's not that much work, but some of the shows that have organized topics and clever, witty banter and comedy routines and skits and pre-recorded audio, it's work. So, if you listen to multiple podcasts, find a couple that you like and donate to them. If you want them to, don't donate to me. I'm fine. I don't need the money, but there's other people that are scraping by, and it's a lot of work. And, give to a couple of the favorites that you like and find some new ones. Find some shows that don't have a lot of listeners that are doing something that you like or something that you think other people would like or it should continue to exist. And go to their Patreon page, which, like I said, I don't have one. But go to their Patreon page and donate a few bucks. It's really the nice thing to do because the more we have, the more voices, the more places we can be heard and found, the better it's going to be for us and for our future and, quite honestly, the future of the world. That, in my opinion, you can disagree, whatever. So, in reference to this car thing, we were planning this vacation, and we decided to drive from Champaign, Illinois, to Florida, to the middle of Florida. My nephew lives down there. We wanted to visit him, and my wife has been bothering me for a very long time to go to Harry Potter World at Universal Studios in Orlando. So we thought about going down there. We looked at the price of airline tickets. And, the funny thing is that flying out of Champaign is really, really easy. I mean, you just show up and there's a line of security of like 5 people, and you go in and there's only 4 gates. There's only like 8 flights a day. Really easy to get out of. But sometimes the flights are more expensive, $400 or $500 a flight just to go to Orlando. So we were looking at $1,600, $2,000 to fly to Orlando. And of course, if you fly to Orlando, then I need to get a rental car for a week. And I thought, instead of spending $2,500 on this trip, why don't I just drive? Now, because I have older cars, the most newest one, at least before a couple of weeks ago, was 10 years old. And the 2 Priuses that we have, at least already or before we bought the new Prius, have almost one has 195, the other one has 230,000 miles. Fantastically reliable cars, very low repairs. We've been extremely delighted. But I'm thinking, if I'm going to drive 3,000 miles, do I want to do it in a 10-year-old car that has 200,000 miles? And I'm sure it'd be perfectly fine, but I'm also thinking, I have 3 cars that are now more than 10 years old. The newest one is an '06. So pretty soon they're going to be starting to sell 17. So 10 years old or older. At some point, I should have at least one late model car, something in the last few years. So I started this process of thinking, I'll buy a used Prius, a replacement Prius, not a new one. And I did some math, and so I'm going to give you a result of a sample of what I did. I looked at 2 possible cars. I looked at a used Prius, and my first thought is around 3 to 5 years is where the first owner suffers the most depreciation. Of course, I mean, the first year is the most, but you want to have it depreciate some, and you can get a deal. And a 2011 Prius with a reasonable amount of miles, like 60,000 miles, I found for about $12,500. And of course, I could have probably shopped and got a wildly better deal, but I got to pick some number to run this analysis. And a brand new Prius is about 25,000, 25 something, 25.2, depending on which model and features that you get. So the used car is half the price of the new car. And this is the logic behind buying used cars. Now, other models of cars, after 5 years of age, you can usually get them for considerably less than half the price. The problem for me is that the Prius is a very, it holds its resale value very well. And they're difficult to buy from just from someone on the street, a private party sale. And of course, if you do a private party sale, you have to get the one that they have, and maybe they're selling it because there's something wrong with it, and you have no assurances or backups or warranties that it's going to be fine, and maybe it had flood damage. I don't know. I know there's ways to check that, but these are the things that you think about when you're doing a private party sale. So you want a little bit lower price, and it might not be the exact model that you want. So, looking at dealerships, like I said, I found one for $12,500. The other thing is, because it had 60,000 miles on it, I'm assuming I can get 140,000 more, maybe more than that, up to 200,000. Both of ours have made 200,000, and they're still in pretty good condition. So I do all this math, and I take into account the cost of fuel. A 2011 Prius will get, on average, I know because I own one. Well, I don't own that year, but I own an older one. It'll get about 42 miles per gallon. And if I don't pay cash, which I would never do, and that's one of the bits of my philosophy, is that if I can borrow money at 2 or 3%, why would I not? That's one of the things we talked about last week with Dave Ramsey. I vigorously disagree with his philosophy that debt is bad. Debt is a tool. Like any tool, it can be good or it can be bad. So we look at that. If I can borrow money at 3% for a used car and invest making 8, 9, or 10, why wouldn't I do that? The other thing to keep in mind is, while the Prius has very little repairs, it will have some. So I estimated $2,500 for the next 100,000 miles, and that's kind of based on my personal experience. I didn't pull it off the internet, so you could argue that this number is too high or too low, and we could have that conversation. But I got to pick a number, and for mine, my wife's, we had to do the front struts, and mine we did a water pump. Both of them we had to do a couple headlights, and I'm not counting tires and oil changes and all those things because they'd probably be similar on both cars, so I don't want to make it too complicated. And then I figured out what the ending value of that vehicle would be after 5 years. And so for the 5-year-old one, it would now be 10 years old. And when I bought my new car, I asked them how much the dealership would give me a trade-in on the 10-year-old one, and they said at most $2,000. So I'm going to use that number. And so when you take into account the purchase price, sales tax, for me it's 6.25 on a new car or a car purchase in the state of Illinois, and a couple other incidentals, cost of fuel to drive for the next 5 years, for me that's about 100,000 miles. Your numbers may be different. Assuming I get a loan at 2.99%, and assuming the repairs, and then subtracting off the end value, the total cost of that car for me to drive 100,000 miles is almost, it's just a few dollars shy of $22,000, which over 100,000 miles works out to 22 cents a mile, which is a great amount. I mean, it's a low figure. So very happy with that. That makes a lot of sense. I started looking at the new Priuses, which probably was my first mistake. You start looking and you start wanting something. And the new one, like I said, is 25, assuming the same sales tax. There's a new Prius model that's called the Prius 2 Eco. And they made some tweaks, and there's a few sacrifices, which I can bore you with later if you want to hear them. But instead of getting the 52 miles per gallon that the new Prius gets, it gets 56 miles per gallon. So instead of 42, it gets 56. Assuming $3 over the life of, or at least over the next 100,000 miles, I can calculate the fuel. And I figured the new car versus the older car, the used car, the 5-year-old car, I could save as much as $2,000 in the cost of fuel alone in the next 100,000 miles. Even more, of course, over the lifetime of the vehicle. So I've got to include that. The Toyota company was giving loans at 1.9%, which I qualified for, so I saved a little bit there. And I'm also assuming that in the first 100,000 miles, I'm going to have very few repairs, so I put in $500 for that. And then at the end of the 5 years, based on a little research I did at Kelley Blue Book, I might be able to get from a dealer $9,000. I probably could get more with a private party sale, but I used a dealer trade-in value on the used car, so I'll use the same apple, I guess. I want to compare apples to apples on this. And when I run that all out over the next 5 years, paying off the interest and all the fuel, the new Prius works out to $25,000 because when I'm done at the end of the 5 years, I have a $9,000 car I could trade in. So the end result is that the 5-year-old Prius is $22,000. The brand new one is slightly over $25,000. A difference of about $3,200. About 3 cents per mile over 100,000 miles. But of course, keep in mind, if I don't trade in the car, I could still drive it for another 5 years with no payment, no interest, still getting higher miles per gallon, and all of this for 3 cents. So I couldn't not at least consider it. I also, right when we were shopping for cars, Toyota announced a loyalty rebate. So if you already own a Prius and buy another one, I got $500 off because of that. I got the dealership to give me a really, really, really good price because Priuses aren't selling as well as they have in the past because gas is under, well, for most people now, under $2 or about $2. And a lot of consumers tend to forget when gas was $4. It wasn't that long ago. And trucks and SUVs are selling great because gas is under $2 and it seems like a hell of a deal. I don't think it'll go up a whole lot in the next few months, but in a year or 2 or 5 or 10 years over the lifetime of this vehicle, I'm betting that gas will be more than $2 a gallon at some point. And so that's why I used $3 in my calculation. So with all of that considered, and the fact that the difference in value is only a couple of $1,000s, and not only would I have a 5-year-old car in 5 years versus a 10-year-old car in 5 years, that's worth something.